Thank you for coming to watch this video. My name is Nicholas van der Nut. I'm a FIDE master and FIDE trainer. The purpose of this video is to introduce some of the background ideas of the Sicilian dragon and its history and some basic evolution of its theory. I have created some study material on some model games and model ideas on lichess.org, and I've placed the link below. So, the Sicilian dragon, what is it? Well, the dragon is a very interesting name. Where did it come from? Actually, it's not completely sure, but the Russian chess master and amateur astronomer Fyodor Dostoevsky claimed that he coined the name dragon variation in 1901 after he saw a resemblance between black's kingside pawn structure and the constellation Draco. So that is where it got its name from in the claim. The earliest games we can find was originated by the German master Louis Paulsen around 1880, and it was frequently played by Henry Bird in that decade, but then it became a viable weapon and accepted more widely amongst the top chess players when Nelson Pillsbury and other masters began playing it. Now, this is the structure of the dragon against the open Sicilian variation. So let's first look, how do we get here? What is happening? So e4, c5. The Sicilian can only be played against e4, the king's pawn opening. Knight f3, then d6. The point of this is, of course, the pawn takes control of e5. It makes way so that the bishop can develop outside on the diagonal. Then d4. This is the beginning of the open variation against the Sicilian. So white gives up a pawn, and when black played c5, they give up a center pawn for a wing pawn. And when black played c5, then of course black's intention was to trade a center pawn for a wing pawn. So in this position, of course we gladly take, knight takes. Now yes, positionally, black now has two middle pawns, so they can push through the center potentially with that. But white in return receives a well-placed knight on d4 and very free, open, quick development. So knight f6, the purpose of this is to compel white to play knight to c3. So this is the idea of the move. This is so that white cannot play the Maroczy system, which was at one stage considered very, very strong to play against the Sicilian. But in today's modern chess, many players with black choose to enter Maroczy setups. But g6, and so we have the beginning of the Sicilian dragon. The intention with the dragon is to develop very, very quickly, and then later on use their central pawn majority to create a possible breakthrough in the middle with the breakthrough d5. But let us look at some model ideas. First, we'll look at a very old idea, the first origin of the Sicilian dragon. So we get, via slightly different move order, our dragon structure. This sets up by white with the bishop on e2 and e3 with short castling is called the classical Sicilian to play against the dragon. Now at this point, the ideas are simple to understand. We will see white using this pawn break with f4 and seeking to push through the middle. Black is going to make use of the semi-open c-file so they can generate play. Now actually, when the Sicilian dragon first came out, it was actually a problem system for white. White was struggling to establish an advantage, and this game that we have here from 1903 is a perfect example of those challenges that were faced. So here, castles, bishop e6, black aims with their bishop to c4 in this position. The dragon, one of the big ideas in the dragon, lots of Sicilians, but especially the dragon, is for black to make use of the semi-open c-file. So white plays f4 with the intention of gaining control of e5 and preparing to push f5. The negative, of course, of f4 is it creates this pawn as a hanging pawn, potential weakness in the center, but white is gaining space and good central control. So black here immediately plays knight a5. Rook to c8 was also very viable, but knight a5 is good. The intention is clear that they wish to get this pawn, this control of c4, and the knight and the bishop to join in. So now at this point, white plays e5, knight to e8. Okay, e5 looks like a strong breakthrough, but black's structure is very solid because black has made very few pawn moves. So there's a lot of resiliency in black's structure. So queen to d2, knight c4, bishop takes, bishop takes. Now at this point, black has done well. Black has obtained a bishop pair, and black is, yes, lacking in space, but white's pieces are not at this stage very menacing. So rook f to d1, queen c7, pawn takes d6, knight takes d6, and now black, we can see this famous dragon bishop spitting fire down this diagonal and creating a great deal of discomfort for white's queen side. So this position is quite good for black at this stage. Black has the bishop pair, black has the knight on this d6 outpost with a good influence on the various possible central squares. Of course, e4, good pressure there, potentially moving to knight f5. So black is doing well. Let's just finish off the rest of the game here, because the real intention is just a bit of the history of the Sicilian Dragon. And here we can see the Eastern European Giza Maroczy handling this position very, very well. So knight d4, rook ac8. Very important to remind you, in the Sicilian Dragon, many Sicilians, but especially in the Dragon, making use of this semi-open c-file is a big deal. This is very important for a lot of black's play. So rook ac1. Now, of course, white is struggling for ideas here in a bit of a challenging position, and already places the rook to concerning themselves to protect this pawn. So black plays b6. Okay, there are different ideas here. b3, I don't think that this is the very best idea for white, as they're creating further weaknesses that black can later exploit. Bishop e6, a very strange looking move, but the point here is that if the bishop were to go to a6, white would then get in knight d5. So black willingly damages their structure because the long-term play down this file and the problems that white has in dealing with defending their knight on c3. So knight takes e6, pawn takes e6, knight e2, knight f5. Very good. Bishop d4. Again, this is a very old game. I think more modern players would handle this position differently, but it's a wonderful bit of history nonetheless. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4 check, queen takes d4, rook takes f4. Okay, and black has now picked up the f4 pawn. Of course, the limitations in black's position are that these are double e pawns. So there is still a great challenge in this position. Queen to d7, rook f6. Good tip. Always try and get your opponent to try, if you can, get them to exchange for you. So queen d7, c4, queen c5 check, king h1, a5. Good idea here by black, using their two pawns to try and fix the dark squares to limit the advance of the white pawns and use the weakened dark squares against the opponent. Rook e1, rook f8, h3, queen d6. Very good. Trying again to get the opponent to exchange for them. In this case, it would be basically winning a pawn for black, since they would undouble their pawns and suddenly return to having a central majority. Queen b7, rook f2, rook cd1, queen g3. And now the position has turned, and suddenly the lack of defense for the white king is a substantial problem, and we get a very nice finish by Maroczy. Rook g1, and then rook 8 to f3. And at this point, white resigned because the fact is that the threat is rook queen takes h3 check, and at the same time rook would take after that with mate. If there's any checks on the back rank, queen c8 or rook to d8, king f7 is the intended move that black will easily use. So a very nice game from Maroczy and a nice bit of history. And as I said, for a while, white players did struggle to generate an advantage due to the fact that black had very good queenside pressure. And as we saw here, very thematic, simple play. Aim for the c-file, use the outpost square on c4 with one of the minor pieces. Until in the 1940s and 50s, players, grandmasters from the Yugoslav region, started to develop a system which later was then named after their play, called the Yugoslavia Attack. And this involved long castling. So this game we're going through is from the 1950s, and this is where the theory had evolved from white's point of view, and many players with black were not yet up to speed on how best to handle the black setup. So let us look at how we get into the dragon from white's point of view. We have, as we said, the open Sicilian, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, there is our Sicilian dragon. So bishop e3, this could still be bishop e2 and a classical as well. Bishop g7, f3, and this move is signifying the beginning of the Yugoslav setup. Now we get castles, queen to d2, and this is officially now the Yugoslav attack against the Sicilian dragon. And as we'll see, this is a very dangerous setup because now knight c6, bishop c4. There are other moves here that can also be played, long castles and g4. But the basic idea for white is, of course, to get their h-pawn up the board, sometimes with the assistance of pushing g4, other times very willing to sacrifice the pawn just to open the h-file. And the point is, once their pawn gets to h5, they're seeking to capture, play bishop h6, use the open h-file, and then we get the famous saying from Fischer, who said that the Sicilian dragon was refuted, because all you do is open the h-file, sack, and mate. But here, black was not really au fait with a very different kind of challenge that this presented. So a6, not good. Why a6 is not good is because black should be focusing on their quick development and trying to get their rook onto this file to generate counterplay as quickly as possible. So long castles, queen c7. Again, the queen shouldn't be on the semi-open file, but we're seeing the battle of ideas. White is more knowledgeable in this position of how to handle this position, and black, on the other hand, is struggling to come up with structured moves. Bishop b3, knight a5, king b1, maybe a little bit overly safe, but the Russian players do say it is called long castling because you must spend another move still on it. So knight c4, well done to black, still getting into this outpost, but it would be far better if there was a rook involved. Captures, queen takes c4, and here we begin the idea, bishop h6, bishop d7. The point of bishop h6 here is twofold. Firstly, to seek to exchange the dark squared bishop. Secondly, to fix this pawn on h7. As we'll see in our next game, one of black's ideas in many cases is actually to advance after h4 to push h5 to slow up white's attack. And here that of course is not possible. b5. Generally a pawn attack on the queen side with a6 and b5 in the Sicilian Dragon Yugoslav variation is too slow. It would need to be pieces that do the damage for black, and maybe the b pawn or a pawn joining in. But here black needed to get their pieces in the game more rapidly. So b5, after b5, h5, b4, and then very nice play, very interesting position. Bishop takes g7 with the intention that queen to h6 is played if pawn takes c3. So king takes g7, knight d5. And this is the process for white in the Yugoslavia attack. Seek to get your h-pawn up the board, swap dark square bishop for dark square bishop, and then swap c3 knight for the f6 knight on d5, and then you have mate. So the reason why, as we'll see in this position, is unfortunately for black, after the exchanges have happened, there is no defense on his king side. Black has not handled this position well at all. So queen takes d5, g4, a move to help ensure overprotection of the advance that white has done, and of course setting up a simple tactic, knight f5 check with the discovered attack on the queen. So queen c5, h takes g6, the opening of the file has now happened, and the black king is certainly feeling the danger. Pawn takes g6, queen h6 check, king f6, and then a very nice combinative move, rook h5, attacking the queen, getting the rook to join in a creative mechanism, and now we see a very strong attack. Queen b6, f4, e6, and then the mate now, where the position is basically lost for black. Queen g5 check, king g7, and unfortunately there are no pieces to protect the black king, so white continues their very powerful attack here. Now the f-pawn threatens to arrive on f6, so rook to g8, pawn takes e6, setting up another mating attack, because the idea is that the rook can join in now on the f-file. So black in desperation tried to run away with their king. The position is, with correct play, lost from black's point of view, unfortunately. The damage was done much earlier, so pawn takes d7, and then black, with a horrible king, piece down, chose to resign. So here we see the development that in the early 1900s, black was doing very well because of white only short castling and not finding this dangerous setup of long castling. Then we have the development in the 1940s and 50s of this idea of the Yugoslav system, where white will long castle and launch a pawn storm on the king side. And of course, as every system, there are ideas in and out of fashion. So here we have the next game, which is very instructive from black's point of view, and this is the creation of the Soltis variation by the Grandmaster Andrew Soltis. And here we'll see this very interesting battle. Both white and black are armed, but Soltis is here the one who brings his new setup in the dragon against the Yugoslav. So the beginning is as we know it. Slight change in move order, but we get to our Sicilian dragon position nonetheless. Here we have the Sicilian dragon with the Yugoslav setup. Castles, bishop c4. As I said, 9 bishop c4 is one of the systems. Long castles, g4, also interesting systems. Bishop d7, bishop e3, rook c8. Great from Soltis. Much better than what we saw in the last game. Quick development, getting the rook quickly onto the file. And now we'll see as later the idea is the knight will aim for c4. And now we have the beginning of the Soltis variation, h5. Now this idea was certainly found before, but further evolvement, as we'll see later on, is very interesting, where Soltis had the idea of rook e8. And here this is very effective for black. Although one shouldn't advance pawns in front of one's king, in this case it's about buying time and generating the own attacking capacity that black has. So here long castles, knight e5, bishop g5, and then very, very interesting we have here, knight h7. Okay, interesting move. Soltis now introduces some new ideas. Bishop h6. Now he captures, queen takes, and then something that is very common in a Sicilian dragon, rook takes c3. This is a very interesting idea. The exchange sacrifice, the rook for the knight. Now let us talk about what black gets for this exchange sacrifice. The Sicilian dragon, black and white, should, because of the sharp nature with opposite side castling, should not be afraid to give up material in order to launch and improve their attacking potential. Now the compensation that black gets, okay, first thing, knight for rook, but the double pawns, the ruining of the pawn structure in front of the white king. Then the other feature is very interesting. The white rooks at this stage do not have any open files. There's some semi-open files, but there's no open files for them to join in. So this is part of the idea that Soltis had by playing h5, is to make sure that no file opened up. So very interesting how we see queen a5. Very, very strong play. Now we see this idea. His opponent plays quite strongly, king b1. We'll see this is actually stronger than king b2. Queen takes c3. Queen d2. This is the idea that the white queen can now jump back, join into defending the king, and still not be isolated on the side of the board. So here, queen c5, knight e2, a5. Now in this position, if we are talking honestly, white does stand better. Black's compensation of a pawn and piece is not enough for the rook. But this is the beauty and the danger of the Sicilian dragon. The positions are so sharp that in many cases it's very, very difficult to just evaluate with a simple evaluation. It's reliant on good, precise calculation, which is so important. So, queen d4, and of course black does not want to exchange queens. The endgame is not beneficial for black in this case. Queen c7, knight c3, knight f6, returning the knight that was out of play to try and join the battle. a4, very nice, because a4 is a thorn. The advance a5 to a4 is a thorn in white's side. Rook c8, king b2, bishop to e6, removing some pieces that are protecting the white king. And once again, I must reiterate, aiming for the c4 square, looking to make it in its most effective way. Here, we've seen the idea of a very old game where Maroczy himself allowed the doubling of the pawns, so he could control the d5 square. And here we see the same idea again in a more sharp position. But of course, white knows that if they were to exchange here, c4 would become critically weak. So rook he1, centralizing the rook. King g7, f4. Now this is again similar idea. The pawn gains control of e5. Knight c6, queen d2, knight b4. Very nice attacking play here. Rook e3, overprotection of c3, which has become very sensitive in this position. Queen b6, launching with the x-ray threat onto the king, potential tactics. Here, white in a challenging position, then errs and plays queen d4. And we'll see that now rook c5, e5, and this is what the problem with queen d4 was. Black actually had this very, very strong rejoiner, which he missed. I suspect the two players were short of time, as both players were very good grandmasters. So knight takes c2 was the very powerful move in this position. The point being, after knight takes c2, the queen will take on b3, and suddenly the position will collapse. There's also bishop takes b3. Very, very dangerous and violent position here. So even though pawn takes on f6 is check, the pawn can capture back, and suddenly this is very common for a Sicilian dragon, where we will see as this example, white has gained an entire rook by the sacrifices that have happened. But black's attack, if you analyze yourself, is very, very convincing. They gain a lot of pawns, and they gain some very powerful counter combinations in this position. So very, very nice idea. But Soltis plays the simple pawn takes e5. Still, black's position very sharp. And if we notice here, the fact that black is the exchange down is not the most important factor. The sharp nature of the game, very, very sharp. Pawn takes e5. And now we get this move, knight g4, very, very strong. And here, white actually resigned. The problem that we are faced with is knight takes c2 is still there as a threat. There is also the problem of the immediate knight takes e3, which is, of course, a problem. And, of course, some ideas of capturing with the bishop on b3. But let's take a move now. Let's say white plays rook f3. Then suddenly the move knight takes on c2 is even more powerful in this position, because b3 is going to fall with a check. And then there's a cascade of problems for white in this position. So a super sharp game. And now there are even more model games that I've included, as I said in the light chess study material. This is really just to introduce you to some of the history and ideas of the Sicilian Dragon. And really, for anyone who's looking to pick up the system or gain some more knowledge, it's a sharp system, but very rewarding for the player with black, because of the fact that it's simple, quick development, and one does get nice, sharp, active play. So if one enjoys sharp, active positions, then this is certainly a system for you. So put your comments below. Hopefully you found this very instructive, and hopefully we can learn from this very simple introduction to the history of the dragon and some of the evolution of the ideas and structures.